Welcome to the United Democratic Women's second Facebook Live event. And today we're going to have a discussion and hear from Democratic women around the country about Roe versus Wade and how that is affecting women, and actually women and all people in the country. And first, I would like to introduce who will start our program today is Winifred Carson Smith, who's the first vice president of the United Democratic Women. Thank you.
In the most significant abortion ruling in 3 decades, the Supreme Court upheld virtually all the provisions of Texas law, but for the rights, responsibilities, and penalties placed on abortion providers, and then remanded those actions back to state court, virtually closing all avenues to abortion for Texas citizens. Hello, I'm Wendy Carson Smith, Vice President of United Democratic Women, a women's organization and a hybrid PAC dedicated to uniting all women to stand together for their rights and to support and elect Democrats. Today, UDW will engage in thoughtful discussion and analysis around this latest round of abortion laws and the associated cases, which have been designed to serve as platforms to overturn Roe v. Wade. As we share our thoughts, impressions, think about what's happening in your state. Given the court's action in November, it seems that at least 21 states where abortion bans can be enforced, according to abortion advocacy and research group, the Guttmacher Institute. Currently, 12 states are considering legislation to ban abortion after 12 weeks, and 47 states have some form of abortion legislation up for consideration. Sadly, the Texas opinions now are ruling not for pregnant women, but to protect health providers has had a chilling effect on the reproduction rights community. And ancillary, but equally chilling government options are being passed. Municipalities are engaging in creating sanctuary cities for the unborn by prohibiting any abortions within their geographic boundaries. Lebanon, Ohio is the latest city to consider this measure, but there are 26 towns in Texas and 2 in Nebraska where the municipalities have custom-tailored ordinances that outlaw abortion based on state law and the city's charter, with the help of Sanctuary Cities for the Unborn, an initiative funded by the Right to Life of East Texas. Thus, on state and municipal levels, there are constant and ongoing assaults on reproductive rights. What will you do to address them? Our panelists today are Susan Shelton, Joe Sheree, and is Karen on too? And
yes,
Karen
she'll be here.
Yes. So I am going to turn it back over for them to start this most interesting discussion.
Thank you very much. And now, Wendy, that's cool. Very good information. And now we'd like to introduce Susan Shelton from Texas, please.
All right, make sure I'm unmuted here. So I'm unfortunately in Texas, and this is a state that I love and I refuse to leave. It is my home, but some days it is very difficult to be a Texan. This has been going on here for quite some time. Roe v. Wade was in fact a Texas case. Sarah Weddington was a Texas attorney. She had not been able to secure a job in any Texas law firms when she first got her law degree because no place would hire a woman And this indeed left time for her to make good trouble. So she took on the Roe v. Wade case in 1973 and won. Now, she didn't find out until she was already seated in the Texas legislature. She became one of the first women from Travis County to be elected to the state ledge. And Ann Richards was her campaign manager. So there's a long history of women supporting women in the state. But back in 2003, one of the first laws that got, or I shouldn't say one of the first laws, but one of the first in a string of laws over the last 20 years that started in Texas, they passed a 24-hour waiting period and enforced an additional lecture from the abortion provider that contained misleading information, like the link to breast cancer and abortion, which is false. And it also required that any abortion performed after 16 weeks had to be done in an ambulatory surgical center. And most abortion providers at that time were not ambulatory surgical centers, and they were forced to close. So that was a problem. We lost a lot of providers that year. And then in 2005, they passed a 24-week ban, and they raised the threshold for minors to get abortions to parental consent, not just notification, but consent. That makes it difficult for young women who are in abusive situations to get an abortion. In 2011, they passed the forced sonogram bill, which, if you've ever had a pregnancy, you'll know that sonograms in the early stage are intravaginal, so it's an invasive procedure. They would force women to have the sonogram 24 hours before an abortion procedure, and the provider was required to give an accurate description of the development of the fetus at that time, which really is just another coercion method. And then in 2013, there was the omnibus abortion bill, which is what HB2 was. And several of those provisions were struck down, but not enough of them, if you ask me. The ones that were struck down were the doctors' admitting privileges. They wanted doctors to have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of where they provided services. Now, most of the hospitals won't give them admitting privileges because they don't work at that hospital. It's really invalid anyway, because if you are in an emergency situation, the hospital will take you. It doesn't have to be the provider that provided the abortion. And it was meant to discourage doctors from being able to provide, which it did, and that one was struck down. The abortion ban was reduced from 24 weeks down to 20. It's a state mandated, they've enforced a state mandated protocol, which actually goes against what the American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists said. So they're actually insisting that some of the medication abortions were used in a way that's more likely to cause issues for the woman. And then they also tried to mandate that if you were going to get a medication abortion, you had to also have that in an ambulatory surgical center. Why you would need an ambulatory surgical center to just take a pill is ridiculous. But that provision was thankfully struck down. In 2015, they decided to make it more difficult for minors to get a judicial bypass, and they also restricted whether or not you could get a judicial bypass within your county, so, or outside of your county. So for some women in the smaller, less populous counties, the pressure of the information getting back to your parents, because the judge in that place knew who you were, was higher. So the idea of being able to go to an adjacent county got squashed. In 2016, the state decided to enforce a fetal burial law. So any fetal remains, whether from an abortion that was elective or an emergency, even a miscarriage, those remains would have to be either cremated or buried. And that, again, thankfully was struck down. It was an egregiously cruel thing to have to put women through who had just miscarried, even wanted children. It was just an additional expense and burden and an emotional torture. In 2017, they said that we wanted to have separate and additional insurance for abortion-related services. So your regular insurance, if you had it, wouldn't cover that. Just, again, spiteful. In 2019, they criminalized abortion providers, if they refused to offer medical assistance to any fetus that survived the abortion procedure. This is wildly inaccurate and mostly just a scare tactic. The idea that a medical provider would refuse medical assistance to any fetus is just weird. But then to play with the dates, fetal viability is 24 weeks. If women can't get an abortion until or after 20 weeks, this is a situation, it's an edge case that doesn't occur. So again, more emotional trauma to just make the concept of abortion scary for providers and for women. And let's see, in 2019, this also would ban any government association with abortion providers. And what that did was hurt low-income communities that used Planned Parenthood for other medical care. So things like birth control, breast cancer screening, STI testing, all of that. You could not use government funds to get those services at a Planned Parenthood provider. And for a lot of communities, that was the only place that they could go. So increased expenditures. And then they also instituted a trigger ban so that if Roe v. Wade should fall, that Texas will automatically make abortion illegal. And all of these things are happening at the same time as we are losing tons of medical providers throughout the state, rural areas. And currently in rural Texas, there are only 40% of the hospitals that can provide labor and delivery services. So even if you're trying to have a baby, you're going to have a hard time. There are people that have to drive well over an hour just to get to a hospital. And there are starting to get increasing instances of women giving birth on the road, on the way, stopping in rest stops and gas stations or in the parking lot of the hospital because they only just barely made it. So this is what we're looking at in Texas, and we keep fighting, but it is a long slog. So we're happy to have people in the fight with us, and we're hopeful that the Supreme Court will give us a break, but it's getting harder to hope for that. So I think that's all I have to rumble about for Texas. So I'm sorry, I'm a little bit of a downer, but hopefully we can get some more uplifting speakers soon.
Thank you very much, Susan. A tough history there, but it's really important that we hear that for sure. And now we can hear from Kansas, from Jo Cherry, who has a battle coming up in her state for laws that are going to prohibit access to abortion. So I'd like to introduce Jo from Kansas.
Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be viewing us from in the country at this moment. As Liz has introduced to you about Kansas, we have the Value Them Both Amendment coming up on our ballot in August of this year. And the main thing that this will change, I have the website in front of me right now. It's that valuethemboth.com/the-amendment/ the main thing, as it states on this site, that is going to change in the state of Kansas is regulation of abortion. Because Kansans value both women and children, the Constitution of the state of Kansas does not require government funding of abortion and does not create or secure a right to abortion. to the extent permitted by the Constitution of the United States. The people, through their elected state representatives and state senators, may pass laws regarding abortion, including but not limited to laws that account for circumstances of pregnancy resulting from rape or incest, or circumstances of necessity to save the life of the mother. So basically, what they are wanting to do is not allow any exceptions for rape or incest. And they don't care about the life of the mother, they only care about the life of the fetus. So if a woman is dying in childbirth, then the woman, they don't care if the woman dies, they just want to make sure that the fetus continues to survive at all costs before the fetus is born. So the reason I asked to speak today and wanted to speak today is because I am a survivor of incest and I am a survivor of rape. And I also have been in 2 domestic violence relationships. And I can tell you now, and this may be a little bit graphic, but I can tell you now that if I had been forced to carry my grandfather's baby, because he did try to have sex with me, actual sex, when I was 12 years old. I was in 6th grade. I lived in a small town that was 100% white, 100% Catholic. I had nobody, okay? If I had been forced to carry that baby to term, or had he actually had sex with me, I would have committed suicide. There would have been no way I would have done that. This amendment would create so much trauma for rape and incest victims and survivors. When I heard this, I was just floored. I cannot believe that, well, okay, Kansas is a red state. Susan, you and I, we are sisters of red states. And so we definitely do feel each other's pain. Had I, like I said, this has just been so traumatic for me, hearing that they want to make this kind of amendment to our state constitution. And this is, today is Kansas's birthday, which is another reason why I wanted to come on and talk about this, because during Kansas's birthday and talking about Roe v. Wade is kind of poetic in some ways. The fact that we are 161 years old and we are wanting to put women back to almost pre-Civil War days is crazy. So for those that may be viewing us from Kansas, and to everybody out there, please talk to your friends in Kansas, talk to your neighbors in Kansas, get them to please vote no in August, during the general election, not general, this is the primary. Also, I gotta get a little distracted here. August primaries are the election day when nobody really pays attention to the primary. Instead of waiting until November to put this on the ballot when people are actually going to pay attention, they decided to put this on the ballot in August. And this is just another example of GOP red state Kansas trying to force their theological ideologies onto Kansans wherever they can. And so I do please urge you to visit with your friends in Kansas, visit with your neighbors in Kansas, visit with the legislators in Kansas, visit with the legislators in DC who are from Kansas, and tell them to not vote yes on this amendment, because it is going to do irreparable harm to rape victims and victims of incest and mothers who, through no fault of their own, may not be able to survive. One thing I wanted to share real quick before I end my speech here is I'm also a mother to a child of special needs. He's an adult child now. And he was born with cerebral palsy. He went into cardiac arrest and lung failure straight out of the birth canal as he was coming out. I was healthy during that birth. I'm not exactly really sure what happened with him, why this happened, but had this amendment been in the Kansas Constitution at the time, had there been something really wrong that had happened to me, if I would have died in childbirth, nobody would have been there to take care of Anthony. And well, except for his alcoholic father. And so, you know, for me, all three of these things really do, it's a gut punch for me. And there are thousands of other women across this state that this is going to be a gut punch to if it passes. So with that being said, I again just want to urge people to talk to your friends in Kansas, your neighbors in Kansas, your legislators, advocates, to get them to vote no on this in August. And with that, I would like to say thank you to Liz and the United Democratic Women for allowing me this opportunity to speak. And thank you.
Joe, thank you very much. Your personal story, I know, hits home to many, many people across this country. And we all need to be fighting this fight. And I know that United Democratic Women is here to fight the fight for you and for people in Kansas and in other states as well. Thank you. Right now, I am going to Karen. Well, this isn't going to work. Hold on. So Karen Chase from Washington State is luckily, happily, she was able to record her speech, her talk about Washington, because she was unable to come here actually live. So I will now share that, and we'll hear from Karen Chase from Washington.
Hello, and thank you to the United Democratic Women for holding this space to talk about abortion access and restriction challenges across our country. My name is Karen Chase, and I've been active in Washington state politics my entire life, from marching as a kid with my mom in war protests to working on education as a school board member and healthcare and human rights issues as our county human rights commissioner, as president of the Washington Federation Democratic Women, and most recently, I was elected as a board member of the Seattle chapter of the National Organization for Women. In Washington State, we are fortunate that if you want or need to end your pregnancy, you have the legal right to have an abortion. It doesn't matter if you're a minor, an adult, married, gender nonconforming, an immigrant, incarcerated, or differently abled. Everyone in Washington State has the right to choose to stay pregnant or to have an abortion. So how did this all become a law? Well, in 1991, activists rallied behind a law protecting abortion access in Washington called Initiative 120. And their goal was to limit the reach of attacks on Roe v. Wade in an abortion hostile political climate marked by Reagan-era influence and the rise of evangelical voters. Abortion rights activist Marcy Bloom in 1991 was the director of Aradia Women's Health Clinic and the board president of NARAL Pro-Choice Washington. She said that in blue states like ours, we realized we can't really depend on the feds. You just never know. We saw the power of the right wing. We saw the power of the Catholic Church and the evangelicals. They weren't a political force until the Reagan years. And so Initiative 120 evolved. And as she put it, into our own statewide Roe v. Wade. So in 1991, Initiative 120 was passed by a vote of the people and declared that a woman has a right to choose a physician-performed abortion before fetal viability. But Initiative 120 did more than legalize abortion at the state level. It included an economic equality provision to ensure that women could access the procedure regardless of cost. This is the reason that Washington allocates state Medicaid funding for abortion, a rare deviation in a country where the federal Hyde Amendment restricts the use of public dollars for most abortion care. Each state gets to decide how it uses its Medicaid funding, so part of it was making sure that economic issues could not be a barrier to women to make this choice. And this is critical because women of privilege, women of means, women of wealth can access safe abortions because they can go to another state, they can go to another country, and poor women and girls can't. Washington further expanded access to abortion through the legislature's passage of the Reproductive Parity Act, which mandates that insurance companies that cover maternity care services also cover abortion. So here in Washington State, we must also thank Senator Patty Murray and Senator Maria Cantwell as steadfast advocates here and across the nation. And like the majority of Americans, they understand that these are decisions that belong between a patient and a provider, not politicians. And as we recognize the anniversary of Roe versus Wade, we must be clear that access to abortion is at risk like never before. Dr. Denise Bayusik, the Chief Medical Officer for Planned Parenthood of Greater Washington and Idaho, anticipates the number of out-of-state patients to dramatically increase if Roe v. Wade is overturned. In Eastern Washington, the Spokane area, right now between 30 to 40% of abortion appointments are for Idaho patients. The Idaho governor signed a law that could ban abortion at about 6 weeks, which is before most people even know they're pregnant. And this makes Idaho one of the 26 trigger states where abortion would essentially be illegal 30 days after the Supreme Court overturns Roe, if that comes to pass. And we know that patients will not come just from Idaho, but from across the country. The Guttmaker Institute has estimated that if Roe's overturned, demand for abortion in Washington State could increase by 385%. That's right, 385%. But at Planned Parenthood, they're not backing down. They were going strong during the pandemic and have expanded abortion services by expanding sites and adding the options of a patient being able to access medication abortion without having to come in person. Dr. Bayusik calls this an all hands on deck moment and won't stop fighting just because there's obstacles. So we know here in Washington, constant vigilance is vital at all levels. In the state legislature, there are a few bills in motion that are related to access. We have one where we're affirming Washington State's Abortion Act. And this bill clarifies unclear language in existing laws and ensures that high quality professionals provide safe abortion care, and affirms that abortion care is accessible and available to all, regardless of gender identity, and commits to the ethical concept that healthcare decisions should be between medical professionals and patients, not the state. We also have a Keep Our Care Act related to healthcare entity mergers. And because mergers between healthcare entities like hospitals and clinics are prolific in Washington state, and under current regulations, these mergers have negatively impacted cost, quality, and access to necessary healthcare services, which in turn exacerbates our systemic inequities for rural and low-income communities, people of color, women, and LGBTQ+ individuals. And right now, these consolidations receive minimum oversight, but the Keep Our Care Act would change that, ensure that all health entity mergers and acquisitions would improve, not harm, community access to care. So in Washington, we're not backing down. This is an urgent moment for abortion rights, which are under attack. We believe that all people deserve access to healthcare without barriers or political roadblocks. We should all have the freedom and power to control our own bodies and our own lives. Abortion is healthcare, and access to abortion is essential. Thank you all for the work you're doing every day for people across this country. You're making such a tremendous difference and highlighting the important values that we're trying to protect to ensure that individuals can make their own healthcare choices based on their personal decisions. Thank you so much.
Now we would like to close out our event today. One, I want to thank everyone who has been shared their stories. And it's unfortunately, we're going to have to just keep fighting this fight. But I'd like to also now bring back Wendy Carson-Smith, who will close out our program today. Thank you. Wendy? No, you're on mute.
Sorry,
Wendy.
yes, okay.
There you are. Good.
Again, thank you for joining us today for our introspective review of abortion rights legislation. On behalf of UDW and our audience, thank you, Karen Chase, Joe Charest, and Susan Shelton for sharing your impressions, concerns, and expertise with us. Also, as always, I thank Liz Duarte, who is chair of UDW's communications team, for organizing and moderating the event. Finally, we thank our members and our potential members for joining us in this discussion. Now, we at UDW want to know what you plan on doing to stop or forestall the attack on women's reproductive rights. As you can tell from the presentations by Susan, Joe, and Karen, the issue morphs and shifts in every state. Joe Charest is addressing an initiative that is a part of a constitutional amendment because they have a constitutional right to abortion in her state. Susan Sheldon has had to address it at the legislative front, not just at the state legislative front, but now they've got municipalities in there. And then in Washington state, they actually made it a part of their budgetary process and passed legislation associated with their budget to incorporate the rights to reproductive rights into their annual budget. First thing I want everybody to do is to look at your state to see how they are trying to assault these rights. Whether they're doing it through a constitutional amendment, whether they're doing it through legislation, whether they're doing it through the appropriations process, know what is occurring in your state. The second thing I want you to do is that if it is a constitutional amendment, let's nip it in the bud early. They generally have to do a petition process to get it on the ballot. So let's stop them there in that process. You can also go to your state board of elections and ethics to see if someone has requested or is attempting to petition it, even though to petition to change the Constitution. If they are petitioning to change the Constitution, they actually are supposed to give public notice. So we want to be savvy and stop them directly in their tracks. When something has been incorporated in the budget side, the appropriations process, it is similarly equally hard to get out because you've got to go back through and you've got to amend the legislation, but more importantly, you've got to go through the budgetary process to remove it. So I want you all to look at exactly how they are approaching it. Look at whether or not they're trying to do it through municipalities and through zoning regulations. Go out there and look. We are strong. We are smart. We are savvy. And just like our mothers and our grandmothers fought to get these amendments and legislations and constitutional amendments in, we have to use all of that savviness and generational expertise to fight them off. This is hand-to-hand combat for the lives of our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Now, some of you say, Wendy, it's not that serious, but it is. I am old enough to remember when women use coat hangers on them for doing abortions. I had a friend at 13 years of age who died from a backroom abortion. I remember, and I will never, ever, ever forget the pain, the shame, the loss of such a beautiful life. So I want you to realize that this is more than just a moment in time. This is more than just a piece of legislation. This is about our reproductive lives. No one does this to men at all. They are not required to do anything. They are not required to put their bodies up in legislation for people to discuss what should or should not be done with them, when they should impregnate somebody. Nobody is penalized for impregnation. They might be penalized for rape, but they are not penalized for impregnation. And what we are doing here is penalizing people for accidents and choices related to their sexual health. If you believe in our work, the UDW work, if you're willing to work, because we are an action organization, think about who we are and join us. Go to www.uniteddemocraticwomen.com and either join us or make a donation. Our earlier podcasts on voters' rights, election suppression, and now abortion rights reflect our values and concerns. Join us and take on the world. Again, thank you for joining us. This video will be posted on our Facebook page and on our website. You can find us on Twitter and on Instagram. We are at UD Women on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, United Democratic Women. Again, thank you for joining us. Thank you. And go out there, sisters, and fight.